Memory. When faced with trauma, it can fracture, blur, and even betray us. Sometimes, as a trauma response to being in fight or flight mode for a period of time, you can have impaired memory. Imagine being so lost in fear, so deeply manipulated, that your mind starts to forget who you truly are, or who you were before a traumatic incident. You lose not only your freedom, but your very identity and your life you knew. Jessyca Mullenberg was only 13 when her world was ripped away, and the person responsible twisted her reality until she believed she was someone else entirely. Forced to believe she was Cindy Johnson. Jessyca started to forget her real name, her real life past. This wasn't just a coping mechanism. It was the result of calculated brainwashing. As her kidnapper controlled every aspect of her existence, Jessyca's mind fractured under the pressure of survival. The trauma ran so deep that she began to forget her true self, fading into the false identity her captor imposed on her. In today's episode, we explore the story of Jessyca Mullenberg, a brave young girl who didn't just lose her freedom, but nearly lost her very sense of self in a terrifying maze of manipulation, control, and abuse. The following episode contains descriptions of child abduction, physical abuse, as well as several mentions of SA, infertility, and other disturbing details that may be upsetting to some listeners. As always, our goal is to honor the voices of the victims, and with today's case, we would like to honor Jessyca Mullenberg's bravery. I would like to thank her for being so vocal about her story. I can't imagine that it's very easy to relive. But I know that she's helping people every time she shares her story. Listener discretion is advised. With that being said, grab your tea and let's dive in. Jessyca was bright, friendly, and full of life. One of her passions in adolescence was writing. She was also very much a tomboy. She would ride bikes and like to play sports. Her mother and father were divorced, and through writing, she was really able to express her feelings privately. She grew up in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. Her and her brothers primarily resided with her mother and stepfather, Monica and Jake. The community was full of children who would all play with each other outside. They would have sleepovers and go to each other's houses often. In the 90s, parents didn't really worry about anything happening to their kids. This is the era of latchkey kids. As a child, you would just ride the bus, get home, and just kind of take care of yourself without adult supervision until they got home from work. In 1991, right next door, a single father, Stephen Oliver, and his son, who was the same age as Jessyca, moved in. Jessyca and Stephen's son, they would go on to become really close and really good friends. They had a lot in common, and they were both writers. Oftentimes, Stephen would invite all the neighborhood kids to play in his yard or watch movies. Jessyca and her brothers would go and see their father, Dale, on the weekends. Monica and Dale had very different parenting styles. Jessyca was not particularly happy about visiting her father since he had a roommate named Dawn. Dale would leave Jessyca in Dawn's care. It's not exactly clear why, but Dawn would make Jessyca increasingly uncomfortable. She would just try to stay near her father or her brothers at all times. But Dawn would wait until Jessica's brother and father were asleep. Late at night, he would go into her room and essay her, forcing her to perform oral acts. Mind you, this was happening before she was in the 5th grade. And sadly, this is not the only abuse Jessyca was enduring. She was too scared to say anything because, like many abusers, he would threaten that if she ever told anyone, he would kill her family. Stephen Oliver was also a teacher's aide at the Stevens Point School, where he began a creative writing club. Whenever Jessyca would hang out or play with Stephen's son, he would often get on to her, tell her that she was misbehaving, and he would order her to go into the kitchen where he would essay her. One article reads, in Jessica's words, "A balding man with thick glasses. He made me sit on his lap. I remember the awful smell of his body odor mingled with cigarettes and coffee. Although he always wore a dress shirt buttoned up right up to the collar, he looked dirty." From what I can tell, it seems the abuse started off as him touching her breast or her behind when they were playing football. Then it would only escalate from there. If she refused or didn't do things a certain way, he would ultimately hit her. In some instances, the essay would happen twice a day. He would physically abuse her by hitting her with a broom or punch her in the back. In addition, he would psychologically abuse her by telling her she was ugly, useless, stupid, and tell her no boys would ever date her. There was one instance when Jessyca attempted to resist. He stabbed her in the stomach with the tip of a knife. She was bleeding all over and forced to bandage the wound herself, and he would not take her to the hospital. The abuse would carry on for 3 very long years. Jessyca would finally receive some good news. Her mother tells her they will be moving to a new town called Wausau, since her stepfather got a new job. She was very excited. It was a relief due to the fact that she wouldn't have to deal with the abuse anymore. She could get away and just focus on her writing. The family moves into their new house. I can only imagine Jessyca was thrilled to be somewhere new. It was a new town. It's fairly close, but it feels like a fresh start. She was finally escaping her gruesome nightmare. But shortly after moving in, there's someone at the door. Her mother goes to open the door, and standing there is the creepy, stinky abuser, Stephen Oliver. It's very unsettling to Monica, Jessica's mother. Stephen also starts calling the house to see if Jessyca and her brothers could play with their son. The creepiness and the strangeness of it all does not fall short on Monica. She warns Stephen to stay the hell away. This is a side note, but Monica did also try to get the police involved, but they told her there's nothing that they could do basically until something happened. And when something happened, Monica knew it would be bad. Now that Stephen is unsuccessful, Jessica's mother is catching on to his strange, obsessive behavior. He returns to Eau Claire, now residing in the same trailer park as Dale, Jessica's father. He knows she'll visit her dad every other weekend. By this time, Dale has a fiance and Dawn, the abusive roommate, had moved out. Stephen somehow gains Dale's trust, which honestly, it doesn't seem too hard to do at this point. He convinces Dale that Jessyca should join his publishing workshop. There are about 12 kids who end up participating in the workshop, including Jessyca and her brothers. He tells the neighborhood children he knew people at a publishing house and could help them get their writing printed. A line purely to lure children in. "I've got some great news," says Stephen right after Dale opens his front door. The publisher for Random House wants to meet Jessyca. They want to meet her right away, like tomorrow. He's telling Dale and Jessyca how they want to publish her short story. "It's in Madison. It's only 3 hours away. Can't she go?" "I'll drive her there, and we'll be back by 10 p.m. Dale, whether he was just naive or gullible, he ultimately agrees to let her go. Jessyca feels unsure, so she questions her dad. Is Mom okay with this? I will also say that it was stated that Stephen made this out to be a really big deal by saying it's not often publishers choose to work with a child and that it's a really great opportunity for her. So after Dale says she can go, he decides to not tell Monica. After all, they should be back by 10 p.m. the next day. Jessyca packs her bag with CDs, a t-shirt, a pair of pants, and a swimsuit. It's September 16th, 1995, in the early morning hours. Stephen picks up Jessyca and they would go on their way. At this point, she's 13 years old and in the 7th grade. She decides to sleep in the back seat. It's a long drive. She's a teenager. After approximately 2 hours, she wakes up and realizes her hands are tied together. She looks down and there's ropes all over. Her legs are tied together. The ropes are going underneath the seat. She has no idea where they are or where they're even going at this point. A voice coming from the front of the car. From now on, you'll be known as Cindy Johnson. You'll refer to me as your father, Dave. Where are we going? Will I get to see my family? Jessyca cries. If anyone asks why you look upset, your mother and twin brother died in a car wreck. They are not headed to Madison, Wisconsin. He drives all day, making his way to Kansas City Airport. At the airport, he manages to hold a knife to Jessica's back as they get on the plane. This is 1995. It's crazy to think, but there's no security, there's not cameras. You could just get on a plane with an assumed name. They land in Houston, and this is the beginning of 105 days of hell for Jessyca. They end up checking into the Days Inn, where Jessica's forced to look like Cindy. He cuts her hair short, colors her hair from blonde to dark brown. She's only allowed to wear baggy clothes, so no one can see her stature. After a full 24 hours of Jessyca being missing, technically missing, Dale starts to become concerned. They should have been home by now, or he should have at least heard from one of them. He calls Monica and says Jessyca had ran away. Her mother becomes frantic. She knew in her heart that something was off. Jessyca wasn't the type of child to just run off or vanish. What was she doing before? Who was she with, Dave? He tells her, Stephen Oliver. There was a point in time where Monica had told Dave not to let Jessyca be around Stephen anymore, especially not alone. As soon as the name rolls off Dave's mouth, Monica already knows and orders him to call the police. Monica and Jake, they get to work. They immediately start putting out flyers in hopes to locate Jessyca faster. Apparently, Stephen had told his elaborate story about Jessica's dead mom and brother to the employees at the Days Inn, and the manager feels sorry for them. This, combined with the fact that there was a block of vacant rooms that were not up to code, led them to hire Stephen, now calling himself Dave, as a maintenance man. They let the pair live in one of those shoddy, unrentable rooms. It was a place no one would ask questions about, and it was located on the empty side of the hotel. Stephen made sure Jessyca was locked inside when he left for work during the day. Back then, hotel rooms could be locked from both the inside and outside, trapping her completely. He would also leave her chained up to the bed. She was forced to write a letter to her family, essentially stating that she was okay, to make it seem like she voluntarily left, and to ask the police and her family to stop looking for her. But Monica knows immediately it was forced. The handwriting, the way it was worded, it just didn't even sound like her daughter. She was not buying it. Days blurred into weeks, and Jessyca was left alone in the run-down hotel room for hours. Every time Stephen left, she would try to desperately to use the phone to contact her parents. But he had somehow altered the wiring so that pressing one button would dial another number. So she would press 9 and it would actually dial a 2. No matter what she tried, she could never reach home. And it turns out before the kidnapping, Stephen was already in trouble for wire fraud and was planning to flee. The kidnapping was just part of his escape. He'd been planning for months before putting his plan into action. Stephen originally had full custody of his son, but he had the mother of his child move into his house and told her he was going to Detroit for work and didn't give her any contact information. It basically just said, I'll call you when I call you. As the days dragged on, hope started slipping away. Jessica's sense of reality became warped. Stephen had been feeding her lie after lie about her life as Cindy. And eventually, Jessyca couldn't distinguish between what was real and what wasn't. He would tell her made-up memories of Cindy and Dave to brainwash her into believing that's who she was. The memories of her real life, her real identity, began to fade. Meanwhile, Stephen would obsessively watch America's Most Wanted every week, hoping to confirm that no one was closing in on him. However, fate intervened on the night of December 28, 1995. For some reason, Stephen didn't watch America's Most Wanted that night, and it was the one episode that featured Jessica's disappearance. The manager of the hotel instantly recognized him and called the show. She didn't initially recognize the little girl. He had worn her down so much she physically looked different, along with the changing of her hair and clothes. The FBI acted fast. At 2 a.m., they stormed the hotel room where Jessyca was being held. They shoved Stephen against the wall, and when one of the agents turned to Jessyca and asked her for her name, she responded, "Cindy Johnson." The agent replied, "No, your name is Jessyca." They took her to the FBI field office in Houston and began showing her photos of her mother and stepfather. Jessyca vaguely remembered part of her home address, but couldn't recall the telephone number. The FBI kept questioning her, and they would show her photos all morning, hoping to break through the confusion that had overtaken her mind. But it wasn't until later that afternoon, when her mom arrived from Wisconsin, that Jessyca finally knew for sure who she was. The moment she saw her mother step off the plane, she ran into her arms. There are pictures of that emotional reunion. Incredibly, just a few days later, Jessyca was back at school. She didn't talk to her parents about the kidnapping or what had happened to her. She just wanted things to go back to normal. However, her peers didn't make it easy. Someone asked her why she didn't try to escape. Questions that only added to her trauma. How could anyone understand the fear she felt? Stephen had beaten her and even stabbed her. The students would also bully her, saying that she was lucky she was kidnapped because she got to be on TV. Despite everything, Jessyca excelled at school. Teachers encouraged her, and she poured herself into her studies, eventually getting good grades, making art projects, and playing sports. She kept herself busy to keep her mind off everything. But the trial loomed large in her future. In June 1996, the trial took place, and Jessyca had to testify 4 hours about the abuse that she had endured. Stephen's defense tried to claim that she had run away willingly and lured him to Texas. But the truth couldn't be hidden. Stephen was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Jessyca's testimony also led to the arrest and convictions of 2 men who had abused her when she was younger. Jessyca went on to graduate high school, then college, earning degrees in psychology, criminal justice, law enforcement, and sociology. But life wasn't easy. She still suffers from PTSD, and staying busy has become her coping mechanism. Her physical scars still remain. She's had to undergo 10 jaw surgeries due to the beatings. Doctors told her she only had a 3 to 5% chance of ever conceiving due to the sexual assaults she endured. But in the midst of her pain, there was hope. Jessyca eventually met a wonderful man, Kurt, and they got married. Against all odds, they had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who are Jessica's world. As we wrap up Jessyca's story, it's impossible not to feel a deep sense of both heartbreak and hope. Jessyca endured unimaginable pain and trauma, yet she refused to let that define the rest of her life. Her strength to survive, her resilience to rebuild, and her commitment to helping others makes her story not just one of survival, but of triumph. Stephen Oliver may have tried to erase her identity and break her spirit, but Jessyca took back control. She's devoted to ensuring no other child has to endure the horrors she faced, using her voice to raise awareness about abuse and kidnapping and grooming. Jessyca's life, now filled with family, love, and purpose, is a testament to the human will to overcome, even in the darkest of times. So as we close this chapter, let's remember Jessyca's story, not only for the terror she lived through, but also for the hope she now carries forward. And in her words, she simply won't let Oliver win. Thank you all for joining me today. If you found this story compelling, please feel free to share with a friend, like, subscribe, leave a comment or review. Stay safe, stay aware, and until next time, let's keep spilling the truth one story at a time.